When you're first getting into the fighting game space, you may be surprised at the plethora of devices you can effectively use to control your character. As much as I believe the best controller for the individual is the one they're most comfortable with, certain controllers are, in my opinion, better at certain things. I want it to be clear that people have won major tournaments with every single one of these controllers. There are no bad options, so long as you feel comfortable playing that particular way. And because in this modern age we have some abominations of controllers, I've partitioned the options into what you would find on the left and right side of the controller. There is a double-edged sword when it comes to the larger range of motion granted to the user when inputting commands with a lever. On one side, it is easier to be precise with movement combinations and perform more complex motion inputs without triggering other inputs, which may ruin the command you're trying to perform. I very often hit down or down right before I successfully input a down right combination input when I try it on a D-pad, but it is difficult to determine if I'm just not used to the D-pad itself. On the other side, because of this range of motion, there is a larger travel time involved with triggering the switches, meaning the speed at which you can physically perform commands is simply slower than some of the other options. Now, I'm not saying you can be incredibly fast and frame perfect with an arcade stick. I find it much faster to do motion inputs with an arcade stick than a D-pad, but you cannot deny the physics involved with doing this compared to this. One large upside to the arcade stick is the ability to customize the system, as you can have a ball top, bat top, different gates, varying springs for increasing or decreasing resistance, and even make the parts as quiet as possible. And because of the customization options, if a part does fail, you can simply purchase a replacement part rather than having to purchase an entire new controller. One fundamental problem though to the lever system is that it is a totally different hand movement to perform inputs on one player side and two player side. Furthermore, to experience the wonders of playing on a lever, you'll need an arcade stick, which means you'll have to drop a pretty penny to get anything that doesn't feel like it's going to break after one session of online play. Lastly, I want to talk about two more subjective aspects to the lever that I personally find to be quite important. One thing is it just feels right. It's a lot of fun to utilize when moving your character around the screen, alongside being very fun to have a visceral feeling when doing moves like Paul's Death Fist, or feeling like you're throwing out a Hadouken when doing the motion. Secondly, I say this as my own personal experience and not as a medical practitioner, but I feel much less hand pain when I play on an arcade stick. As someone who has played way too much World of Warcraft, StarCraft, Counter-Strike with no ergonomic thought, my hands are pretty cooked. I can really only play games on an arcade stick for a long time without feeling any pain. The absolute biggest pro when it comes to the D-pad is that you already have access to it, so long as you're playing on console. Barrier of entry cannot be understated, and being able to play the game you just bought is a pretty welcome sight. The D-pad offers a familiarity to non-fighting game enthusiasts, as you've probably had thousands of hours with it, so it's quite intuitive for almost all gamers. The actual benefits of a D-pad versus a lever, it's a small amount of travel time to input any movement command. Double tapping for dashes is extremely fast, and doing things like instant while running moves is trivial for this device. One problem a lot of people find though is the less intuitive way to do motion commands such as doing half circle commands, which I'm not going to say is harder, it just takes a little getting used to. Another major flaw I find with the D-pad system is that many controllers have just horrendous D-pads. If you're in the market for a D-pad and you want it quite cheap, I do suggest a first-party DualShock 3 PS3 controller, but thankfully if you do trash your D-pad, which you will do if you play thousands of hours, you can always replace them pretty cheaply. I've put these two together because they kinda have the same strengths and weaknesses, and it's my list, so I can do whatever I want. Keycaps can not just be found on your keyboard, but also on a mixbox, which looks pretty stupid, but it's a pretty powerful piece of equipment. The core strength of a keycap is that it is very fast, very intuitive, and makes things like dash blocking trivial. It takes the strengths of a D-pad up to 11, whilst also removing inconsistencies in your input since you don't have your thumb doing everything. The hitbox system is all of this, but even faster since all fingers on your left hand have a direction to sit on. Yet it is much less intuitive and will take a while for you to completely not mess up the most basic combos. The upside to the hitbox though is that you can blast 720 motion inputs so fast that it's almost unfair. The movement of a hitbox and keycap is so clean, fast and scary that many technical characters and players end up drawn to a hitbox or mixbox peripheral so that they can get the most out of their characters. Now for the right side of the controller. What can I say about arcade buttons that hasn't been said by almost every single person that's ever played on an arcade stick? They're amazing. They're big, responsive, easily pressable, intuitive, and fun to use. After a small amount of use, you'll never accidentally hit the wrong button like you may on a controller or keyboard, especially when handling multiple button presses. If you can't bind button combinations in your game, that may not be a problem for arcade buttons, but it can easily give grief to, say, a pad user. One of the only real complaints I can say about them is that if you have a really cheap knockoff controller with bad buttons, it's just not going to be a good time. But thankfully, Sanwa buttons are cheap, reliable, and even come in a silencer version. You'll only find these buttons on an arcade box setup, which promotes better ergonomics, at least for me, but suffers from being a bit of a pain to travel with. They are expensive, I do understand, but I have so much fun playing with an arcade button layout that I'll never go for any other option that doesn't utilize them. I'm going to talk about first party pads, and then I'll go into other options afterwards. PlayStation and Xbox controllers have decent buttons overall. I feel as if though it's pretty universal that PlayStation has a better feel regarding fighting games, but that may just be the people that I've come across. As long as your controller doesn't have sticky buttons or a broken trigger, you should be in pretty good company. The problem is that you may have to start holding a controller with a claw grip to actually hit multiple buttons or sequences correctly. You can bind combinations to triggers, which may solve a lot of issues for you, but I feel as if the whole system is a little bit less intuitive so long as there isn't a block button. If the game has a block button like Mortal Kombat, then throw out the whole arcade stick and stick to the pad, because I feel as if it's the only way to play these types of games. They're a little imprecise overall since the buttons are so tiny, and you can't plink or piano roll these buttons like you can with an arcade stick, but if you don't know what that is, then you don't need to worry about it. There are other controllers such as the Hori Fighting Commander, which places 6 buttons on the face of the controller, so all of my Street Fighter fans don't lose their mind when trying to heavy punch with a shoulder button, but you are now buying a separate controller specific for fighting games, but so long as you love it, I'm happy for you. Lastly, we have the rest of the keyboard. If you play on PC, then hey, you probably already have one. But unless it has something like cherry switches, then it can be a bit of a clunky experience. My own personal hell would be forced to play Street Fighter V with a Macintosh keyboard. Just like arcade buttons, you can press multiple buttons easier, they're just a little bit tinier. The main complaint I have is that if you're going to a tournament with it, well, better you than me. If you're playing from home and you're never going to go outside and you've fallen in love with it, then continue farming those ranked wins with Akuma. Now I've gone through all the different types of peripherals and you may find them mixed and matched all over the shop, yet you'll only find levers on arcade sticks and you'll only find D-pads on pads. Just quickly divulging my opinion, if you were a robot sent back in time to win every single tournament out there, then the hitbox is a very strong controller to do it with. But overall, I'm only ever going to be playing on an arcade stick because it's really fun, and if you have the money to purchase one, or you can bribe someone at your local to let you try it for a game, I would highly recommend it. Thanks for watching. All of my subscribers and any new subscribers will be blessed with less than hand pain, because I want us all to be playing Tekken well into our old age. Bye.